Hi, I'm Juliet.
And I'm Peter.
And I'm a licensed therapist.
I pay to talk to one sometimes.
And this is Intrusive Plots, a podcast about OCD in TV and movies.
Okay, episode 4. No guest this time, just us riffing in the riffing way that we do. I was not prepared for the air guitar.
Always keeping you on your feet.
I was okay. All right. Okay. Welcome everyone back to Intrusive Plots. Apologies, we're starting our episode after Pure O with Pure. We really should have moved the titles around so they're not confusingly similar. But here we are. This one has been heavily requested.
And we're so excited to get into this. So yes, we will be discussing Pure. Before we talk about the TV show, we wanted to talk a little bit about the book that this was based off of. This was a memoir by Rose Cartwright, and she talked about her experiences living with sexual intrusive thoughts and OCD. But I wanted to bring this up before we start because about 7 months ago, she released an article on The Guardian talking about her newfound understandings of mental health based on some of her experiences exploring the wellness community as well as psychedelics. And
it was spicy.
The title of the article is "I was the poster girl for OCD. Then I began to question everything I'd been told about mental illness." So as you can imagine, this article had a lot of ripples in the OCD community because there were a lot of things in it that could have been very right for Rose. But when we look at the broader context of mental illness, I just want to state, mental illness is a real thing. There are definitive differences in people's brains who have mental illnesses versus people who do not have mental illnesses. And while there is a lot about the current mental health system that could be improved upon, the kind of basis with the research and with the best practices of care are there for a reason. And in her article, she talks about how the mental health industry is all bullshit and how for her OCD is not OCD. It's just based on, her attachment wounds from her mother's mental illness. So there's a lot there.
There is a lot there. It was a wild day on Instagram. I'll tell you that much. When something big happens on the internet and everyone has to give their take on it, but nobody wants to give their take on it while naming the source. So everyone's making some vague story post being like, haha, so that happened. Wow, that was wild.
And I missed the whole thing, apparently. I just read this article for the first time today and I was like, oh, this is a spicy article. We should talk about this.
I am so glad that we have you on this so that I don't have to weigh in as someone that has no ability to weigh in on this whatsoever. Oh, thank God for legitimacy and degrees. Oh, thank God.
As I was reading the article, for those of you who have not read it, if you're interested in reading the full thing, it's on The Guardian. But the thing that really came to me as I was reading it was how oftentimes people's individual experiences get published in articles like this. And instead of it being taken as an opinion piece or one person's experience, sometimes there can be this overgeneralization of the information. So, maybe for Rose, she had a lot of positive experiences using psychedelics, doing non-traditional forms of healing with MDMA and other substances. For her, it does sound like she worked through whatever was going on. It sounds like she has OCD and also there was some trauma with her mother's experience. However, this doesn't mean that everything we know about the medical model is wrong and that we have to just kind of throw it out and go with this different approach. As a social worker by trade, the model that I was trained on, which is a biopsychosocial model, talks about how a person exists within the context of their environment, their genetics, their everything. And Rose was talking about this as well. However, it didn't necessarily come across as, I don't know if she really understood the meaning of this model because she was talking about how everything exists in a context, which, yes, and I think anyone who's a mental health provider will tell you that that's true. Maybe the mental health providers she worked with truly didn't talk to her about the stress diathesis model, which is that mental illnesses arise based on a combination of someone's genetics, their predetermined gene makeup, and then their environment. And usually something in their environment or just a hormonal change will trigger those genes to activate for the diagnosis that they experience. And yes, there's no like genetic test somebody can take to be like, yeah, you 100% have OCD, or yeah, you 100% have depression. However, there are kind of norms that we've seen across cultures, across age groups, that we can use to reliably diagnose people with mental health conditions.
This conversation sounds a lot like a certain quote from a certain someone. Do you think you just fell out of a coconut tree? You exist in the context of everything that has come before you. What? That's not winning the popular vote?
Let's have a moment of silence. I will remember you.
Shut the fuck up. Okay. All right. So back to like real information.
Yes.
This show was really good.
It was really good.
Yeah.
Really good.
Like, there are certain things that therapists love to clown on, and there are certain things that therapists love to, like, put on a pedestal. And this was one of the ones on a pedestal, and I can really see why.
It was so good. Like, from the first 30 seconds, I was like, okay, I know this is going to be good. Do you want to read the IMDb?
Yes.
About it to get...
So we don't make this mistake again?
Yes.
Okay. Fury is a British television series first broadcast on January 30th of 2019 on Channel 4. I'm going to pretend like I know, like I'm very familiar with Channel 4. Based on the book of the same name by Rose Cartwright, it stars Charlie Clive as 24-year-old Marnie, who suffers from obsessive compulsive disorder and is plagued by disturbing sexual thoughts. It ran for one season. It was announced in 2020 that it would not be renewed for a second series, as they call them in the UK. But isn't that like most UK shows anyway? You get like 2 episodes of Sherlock and then 4 years go by. Or
yeah, it's like a really good show and then there's a season and they're like, sorry, we're not doing another season.
That's more Netflix's speed, you know?
So sad. All the good shows. And then Grey's Anatomy has like 55 seasons.
Uh-oh, don't say that.
No shade to Grey's.
My wife loves Grey's.
I did too.
You did?
Yeah.
What made you fall off the Grey train?
Well, it's just after like 24 seasons, I was like, okay, how many like near-death experiences can these doctors get in and survive? Meanwhile, I have a pimple in my ear that becomes infected and then my ear swells up like really big.
That does sound like a Grey's B plot or C plot, where like 2 doctors are arguing about their romantic relationship while a patient's sitting there with a horrible infection.
Yes.
I could see that making on the show.
She's septic.
This is a buzzword you can throw out. Oh, they've gone septic. Okay. Pure. So, this show is essentially a dramedy, like a romantic dramedy. The first 3 episodes of the 6-episode season are a lot about the nature of her sexual intrusive thoughts. It splits off 3 episodes after to kind of focus on the characters around her too, and then her kind of interpersonal problems. The OCD stuff is still there. If you're looking for just the really intense representation, we found that more in the first 3 episodes. It starts pretty... I'm going to throw out a word, didactic. Ooh. Did I say that right? Didactic?
I believe you. I don't think I've ever said that word out loud, so.
You've never taken the SAT and had one of those bullshit shower curtains?
No.
Oh, yeah. So it starts pretty didactic, which is kind of like common for an adaptation of a book. Didactic meaning it kind of talks at you a little bit. A lot of books turn movies, a lot of books turn TV shows will have like a narrator. It'll have a lot of first-person-y kind of stuff. You're watching a movie, you can't have it be in first person really. So what they'll often do is they'll have the main character either referring to the camera, or they'll have a voiceover, or they'll have kind of stuff going on like that. It's really hard to not have literally any straight dialogue information about this very strange illness. Every movie, including my own, that talks about this has like the weird scene where they talk about, yeah, we have anxiety like this, but for people with OCD, it's like this. It's so hard to make something without like a scene like that, you know? Mm-hmm. Like I couldn't pull it off. Pure O, which we just watched, it kind of leans into it in more of a talky kind of way. And then other things will have it be in like a conversation between 2 people. And it's so hard to like not get bogged down with that. Thankfully, they do get it out of the way, like up front. Hey, you ever have like really messed up thoughts? What if a person had messed up thoughts all the time? Okay, let's go. Let's do this.
I took a video of that because I was like, oh, this is so great. I love how they just like gave a little like, hey, for anyone watching who doesn't know what intrusive thoughts are, this is what you're about to see.
It also helps because the nature of these intrusive thoughts are not afraid to get as X-rated as humanly possible. A lot of films that tackle this kind of stuff don't really have the courage to show the graphic nature.
This one did.
This one did have the courage. I'll tell you that much. They open in this kind of anniversary surprise party speech. And I actually love this scene not just for the showing what the intrusive thoughts look like. I like it for a few reasons, actually.
Let's hear them.
I don't know if y'all have ever seen a show called Fleabag.
It did remind me of Fleabag.
So Fleabag's a very different show, but there are a few similarities. A dark sense of humor to kind of make the uncomfortable sexual nature of things kind of go down smoother. The first person adjacent nature of this show was similar to Fleabag, minus talking directly to the camera, which is kind of a gimmick that Fleabag sort of explores. It keeps dark subjects light in strategic ways, which I think was a very good choice based on the nature of the thoughts that Marnie was going through. So we see that in the first anniversary speech. We also see, like, her jokes bomb in front of older people. So we go, okay, we know, like, the average kind of person that she would kind of connect with, and it's not these people.
Yes.
We also sneak in, and this is so important, we talk a lot about values. We talk a lot about, like, OCD attacks the things that are closest to your heart. She cares about her family.
She
Genuinely.
really does. And her best friend.
And her best friend.
Helen.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
When these intrusive thoughts actually start hitting, we are so much more primed to see and receive them as she sees and receives them. So I like that a lot. One thing that I thought they did really well was they made the sexual intrusive thoughts comic in a way, because that's really the only way to do it if you want to keep the show's tone what it is. Literally the first time they like cut to an insert is basically just a shot very close up of something. When they cut to an insert of someone's genitals or whatever, I heard like an airplane crash. You know, like they are laughing at it a little because it's hilarious. It's also very disturbing to the character and disturbing to us, but it's also hysterical. And that's how the show kind of gets away with what it does.
I agree. Can I ask you, from a director, filmmaker side of things, logistically, what do you think it would have been like to shoot all of these sexual intrusive thought scenes? Like, do you think they did them all like the same day or the same week? Or like, did they just say, hey, casting call, like people who don't mind getting freaky? Like, what do you think that was like?
I dread that.
There'd be a lot of contracts, right?
Nowadays, there would be an intimacy coordinator.
So,
for those who have been living under a rock, post the Me Too movement, there has been a popular new set position called the intimacy coordinator that has been introduced. And essentially, it's someone that comes in and makes sure everybody that is working on the show that handles sexual or sensual scenes are comfortable with everything. Not everyone can afford one, but it adds an extra layer of protection for the actors, an extra layer of protection for the production. It makes sure that everything's kind of on the level. I think a good way of equating it would be like a stunt coordinator. Because a stunt coordinator goes, okay, here's how we do this safely, here's how we pull this off, and we're going to make sure the director gets what they need, the actors feel safe, and everything's on the level. Like, that's what that position does. So then it involves being kind of courageous about what you put in the casting breakdown, being upfront with everyone that's going to be on camera saying, hey, this is about a mental illness with graphic, intrusive thoughts. It definitely helps that this is a show written, directed, and created by women. Like, it really helps there. A lot of the inserts you can probably get away with. I'm not saying that's what they did here, but you could probably get away with like existing footage for like inserts, you know? You don't have to necessarily shoot every single new thing as long as you have the rights to that footage. Again, not sure if that's what they did or not. But for the other stuff, when they cast those background, it's probably a minefield, even with all that extra legal stuff. I'm blown away that they got away with all that. They must have had a sense of humor about it on the show, you know?
it was so well done.
It's a tone. Picture watching this show without the witty commentary of this woman going, hey, isn't this crazy? Like, picture watching this show without the, like, Or like later in the episodes, we see the barista with the foam on his face going, you know, like picture watching it without all that self-aware stuff. This would be so alienating to anyone. They'd be like, what is this serial killer shit? You know, they'd look at that and be like, what the fuck are we watching? They literally have to look at themselves and go, yeah, we know this is ridiculous. You know, I applaud the knife's edge they walked on to make the tone of this show what it is. Oh, man. So after she experiences sexual intrusive thoughts in front of everybody at her parents' anniversary, this is all in the pilot, by the way. Everyone's worried about her. It's also very frustrating about 10 minutes in when someone says, oh, it's anxiety. Everyone's got this.
Just picture people naked. It'll help you.
Oh my God. Okay, I do like how they put that in, though. Like, that's some delicious irony. Picture people naked.
She goes, okay.
Exactly. There's also a lot of moments in real life when the little things that people drop, because a lot of us don't tell the people around us the really graphic or upsetting nature of some of this. So if somebody drops like a little joke or a little colloquialism or whatever, they'll never know just the gravity and the implications of the thing they said. That's happened to me a bunch. It's probably happened to you and you listening to this if you have OCD.
Definitely. There was a quote from like the first 5 or 10 minutes of the movie that I just wanted to say because I thought it did a really good job, like you were talking, Peter, of highlighting the like severity while also adding some kind of humor and lightness to it. She goes, it's like The Sixth Sense, only I don't see dead people. I just see naked people.
Like, that's a pretty good joke. Like, yeah.
That's great. Like, yes. Yeah, there were a lot of lines from here. And I was thinking, I'm sure the book has even more of these direct quotes that are fabulous.
What's really interesting about sort of these intrusive thought cuts that kind of the really X-rated, like right in your face kind of stuff, they can actually be used as a punchline in a comedic setting. And so that's a way that they can kind of keep that idea fresh. Because I was watching the first episode, I was watching this and I was like, okay, so it looks like this is going to be the format of the show or like the gimmick of the show. Oh boy, is this going to get old? What can they do to keep this fresh? And there were ways I thought they did. There were ways I also thought they maybe didn't. Whenever you introduce something like that, like going back to Fleabag, being like, oh, is the addressing the camera gonna get old? And in season 2, I don't know if you watch season 2, they find a way to keep it fresh.
I haven't seen season 2, but
I will not. Oh, it's better.
I
Better
want to watch
1.
it.
So that's always like whenever you take something on like that, you run the risk, especially when it comes to a show about a disorder that's repetitive, because that's something I struggled with early drafts of Exposure. I would send it out to my friends and they get back to me like, oh, like, you know, the first like 30 minutes honestly get a little repetitive. And I go, yeah, but that's the experience, you know? And just because it's upsetting every time you experience obsessions doesn't mean in a show or a movie it won't get old or stale or boring to the audience, because you have to introduce new information. And that's what's really frustrating about adapting OCD to like a fictional format, because you always have to be giving the audience new information. But as an OCD sufferer, you're often not getting any new information.
That's very well said. Yes. One thing I thought that they did a really good job of with like representation wise of OCD was they also showed how a person with OCD often will go to really kind of extreme lengths to have relief from their intrusive thoughts. So with Marnie, we see her engaging in a lot of substance use. Like she tries really hard to drink as much as she can to prevent herself from having intrusive thoughts, specifically like if she's going to be having sex or doing something that feels like especially important to not have the thoughts. And that also is kind of the way OCD will work, where the more you tell yourself, oh, I just can't have any of these thoughts right now, they will definitely show up even more. But they showed her doing everything she could to make them stop. The actor, she did a really good job. What was her name again?
Charlie Clive, I want to say.
Charlie Clive. You notice every time she has these intrusive thoughts, you see her kind of engaging in like a compulsion of like trying to like almost squeeze the thoughts out of her head. And like we see her face contort. And this is also another really common compulsion for folks with OCD, where they have these thoughts, they're so distressed by them, and they almost have to like go like this to like prove to themselves that they don't like it or that they wouldn't want to do it, or to just like make the thoughts go away. And another part about the representation that I loved is the way that they kind of smoothly discussed how OCD is ego dystonic. So we see her in a group, and it appears to be like a porn addicts anonymous or like a sex
addiction
support group. Very well said. Very well said.
You can't
Peter.
get away from these. You can't get away from these group scenes in these movies. You just can't.
She's sitting there and she's like discussing every single intrusive thought she's had. And as she's talking, her commentator narration is like, at this moment, everyone is realizing that what I'm experiencing is not sex addiction, but they're too polite to tell me. And then afterwards, someone else discusses like his experiences. And we see so clearly how her thoughts are distressing. Her thoughts cause her anxiety. Her thoughts are really like not at all related to what she would want to do. And they did such a good job of pointing this out without being like, let's define this term and let's make it really educational.
There are a couple of moments where they literally open a book and do the educational thing. Like, there are moments where it's woven in. There are moments that are a little bit more, okay, we are going to just straight up tell you, which, you know, you have to do a lot of this work to make people get the point because the actual stuff is so charged with everyone that watches it. Again, if they didn't have all of this like work they're doing to show that these are ego dystonic thoughts, the people would be like, what are we watching? Who is this person? They'll make all the judgments that Rose is trying to avoid.
So another part of this that I thought they did a really good job of was we see her doing a lot of testing compulsion. So she has a lot of sexual intrusive thoughts about women. So when she goes to London, she goes to this like clinic and she starts to tell the like nurse or the doctor about some of these thoughts that are like pretty, I don't know, I'm gay, but she's like, yeah, I want to take a stiletto and shove it inside my friend's vagina. And the person is like, well, do you think you're gay? And she was like, I'm not sure. And the woman's like, well, why don't you go test that, explore that? Maybe you are. So we see her like go to a gay bar. We see her get to the point where she's about to have sex with this woman. And we see her like testing to see like, is this telling me something? Is this implicating something deeper about my life? Or is this OCD? And it can be so tricky when you have OCD to understand like your sexuality or dating because it's really confusing.
So, okay, I understand that this is a memoir or an adaptation of a memoir, but one thing that is really strong in the writing of this show is that when you want a character to learn about something, you put them originally as far from that lesson as you can so that they can learn the lesson or learn the things they need to know through the challenges along the way. Having someone figure out their sexuality and their romantic dating life while burdened with a disorder with rampant intrusive thoughts about graphic sexuality that you can't navigate, that is a great setup for a show. It's a great setup for a journey. Also, some amazing humor that comes with it. When she's checking ID, do you have some ID? Do I need ID to see if I'm gay? Like, that was an amazing line. That was so good. One thing I'll say about that doctor scene, too. First off, she's like, I think about jamming the stiletto into her vagina or whatever the line was. And the doctor goes, oh, that's a regular lesbian thought. Maybe
you don't know about that?
Yeah, right? I'm unaware. I'm so sorry.
Oh my God. Get informed.
Yeah,
it's not
right?
my job to educate you.
It's just, Google exists. But the doctor, like, not seeing any potential of a mental illness there. In fact, like pulling up her own bra strap underneath her sleeve.
Oh,
that's a very real moment right there, too. This look of disapproval and then smash cutting to her licking her armpit. Like, that's another moment of humor in there, mixed in with these very real kind of depressing moments. This show hits you with a lot. Also, self-medicating with alcohol and drugs, that's depressingly common. Towards the end of the first episode, we get the sense that, look, there are some therapists on Instagram, and I don't know how much you subscribe to this, but there are some folks that talk about core fears. We get the sense that judgment is kind of at the center of all this. And she goes on this monologue about how the anonymity of a city feels freeing. That I can do whatever I want and no one will be there to care. I can do whatever I want. And then some Londoner says, shut the fuck up, you know? Which is like, usually that joke applies to like New York or somewhere, but you know, same thing. This show is very about your 20s in that way. Realizing that no one is going to be breathing down your neck to form your own identity, and that's largely up to you, which is kind of a bigger theme as she figures out that yeah, it's on her to figure out her mental illness. It's also on her to figure out her identity, and it's also on her to figure out her romantic life. So that's kind of a broader idea of what the show is about. Yeah, that's kind of the first episode. We did watch all 6 episodes, and we'll talk about like the next few. One thing, again, we'll warn you about is that it does get into more of like a dramedy, romance drama kind of thing where like, wait, is this an OCD show?
But her OCD is interwoven through all of it. And we do see how it can be really confusing for her to navigate like dating and know like, do I want this or are these intrusive thoughts? Like,
Yeah.
how do I know, am I actually attracted to this guy or is my OCD telling me? And we see her kind of going through that inner battle.
Yeah, I think also when it comes to like figuring out your sexuality, that involves another person. And when that stuff involves another person, it becomes a lot harder to do. Like, I think her employer was like, this isn't Love Island. You can't just do that to people, you know? Like, OCD and sexuality, it's hard to figure yourself out in a total vacuum. I think she used the phrase fanny tourist, which is the most UK slang I've ever heard in my life. You're a fanny tourist, you know?
We need to adapt some of these, like, these are good lines.
Oh, you want to Americanize fanny tourist? You want to make an American
Please.
remake?
Yeah, just wait.
This also, a lot of all this is some high quality cringe, which would make my wife turn the TV off. A lot of people can handle like murder documentaries and serial killers and cults, but when it comes to like a real life situation where you feel secondhand embarrassment for something somebody said, they're like, I can't handle it, I'm out.
That's so interesting.
It's more common than you think.
She must be really empathetic.
Oh, she's incredibly empathetic. It's one of the reasons she can't watch The Bear, that show about working in a kitchen. She can watch like things where people are like getting killed or whatnot, but The Bear where your boss yells at you, just TV turns
That's
off.
the line.
Okay, here's a therapy question.
Yeah.
So, a lot of the first 3 episodes or so, she tells herself, once she discovers that it is in fact OCD, she starts having these intrusive thoughts and she says, it's not me, it's my OCD. It's not me, it's my OCD. Is that reassurance in itself, or does the labeling actually have a positive effect?
That's a really good question, and it's so nuanced. Once again, it's like we exist in the context of which we are and all that's come before us. So
It's very coconut pilled.
it is coconut coated. At first, when we see her say this, I see it more as her trying to start to integrate this new information that she has about how what she's been experiencing for a very long time that she thought was her being a pervert and all of these things that she labels herself as is actually a mental health condition. And if someone is able to do that as a way to label the thought, it can be helpful. However, if someone begins to need to tell themselves that every single thought they have that's distressing is OCD, it can become something that is done as like a reassurance compulsion. So it really varies. I think for her, when she says like, oh yeah, I'm cured, you know, I realized I have OCD. I started saying, oh, this is just OCD. And then I'm good. That would be great if it worked like that.
Okay, so there's this show on the CW. It's one of the CW's better shows called Crazy Ex-Girlfriend.
Love it.
You've seen it?
Yes, I have.
Okay, so you know the My Diagnosis song.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
there's this kind of sweeping relief and validation of getting diagnosed with something. The label is so freeing. It's so like, oh, thank God. It's not something wrong that I did. It's not something that like no one's ever seen before. There's a path forward here. Like that knowledge alone is sweeping relief. It is also extremely temporary.
Yes. And they did a great job showing that because we see her when she realizes, she's like, oh my God, it's OCD. This is OCD. And we can see her, she starts crying. And I could relate to that. That's such a like powerful experience. Yeah. And then by the next episode, she's like,
oh, what? I'm not cured?
okay, but. And that's something that Rose Cartwright discusses in the article. When she became aware that she had OCD, she felt a lot of relief. But then shortly after that, the intrusive thoughts came back and all of this. It's like, yes, that's the nature of this disorder. Logic doesn't work with it. So logically, you can know you have OCD and it still feels really real.
As we get to episode 3, we've got kind of her re-entering the dating world and kind of handling the sexual intrusive thoughts. we start to see her confront uneasy thoughts like, what if I'm actually a perv and I'm using OCD as an excuse? Which that's kind of a question I deal with in our movie. I've seen it dealt with in other TV shows and movies. It's a very relatable one. Like, what if I'm just using the label of OCD to get out of the fact that X? I will also say the barista innuendo intrusive thoughts with the latte foam. Okay, I was worried at that point that the intrusive thought cuts would get a little old. I was still down with that.
Pleasantly surprised.
Yeah, it did get a little old down the line, but I was still liking it in episode 3. We're also entering the point where we start getting into pretty traditional, like, oh, this plot, I had a fling with this guy, and he likes me more than I like him. Oh no, what do I do? That's a very, like, you know, we start getting into a regular kind of dramedy type stuff. We also get kind of closer, and I believe that, was this episode 3 or episode 4, where she kind of has this really sad episode in the office where she's working. To be fair, they weren't paying her, so who cares? But she has this episode in front of all these people, and I couldn't help but thought, like, yeah, like we are meant to side with this person, and we see all the reasons they got to where they are, but OCD does affect your work life in ways that are not okay, and they don't look good from the outside. Self-medicating by drinking wine in the fridge during the day, like that's fireable. And it just kind of goes to show that, like, yes, there's two sides to all of this, and yes, OCD is this horrible, horrible thing, but the real world is still the real world, and it expects things of you.
And also, when someone is so debilitated by OCD, we often see kind of their ability to have insight into their thoughts being real or just thoughts. It gets really murky. And because of that, when someone's having like really distressing, intrusive thoughts about like maybe other people judging them or other people talking about them, they can come off as like very, very almost paranoid because their brain has made them feel so certain that that's what is actually happening. So we see her responding to these thoughts as if the people in the office are truly like conspiring against her, talking about her. And maybe they were, but the extent that she believes it is a big part of OCD and can be really hard for people in work, in relationships, with family.
To be fair, there were a couple moments in that office where there was one coworker that just glared at her the whole time. Never got her name right, just glared at her. Like, that's, we would cut to like her going, if you're listening, I just made a mean face. That's it. That's what that character did. And then like that first day where she was delivering tea, she's like, oh, who had the green tea? And everyone glares at her like they didn't order green tea. You could just say, yeah, that's me. That's it. Like, maybe I'm butthurt because I was an intern once, you know? But like, come on, guys. Oh, episode 4, when she wakes up in the morning, it starts off with this line being like, whenever you wake up, everything's cool for the first few seconds before you remember everything that's wrong. And because OCD relies on this pattern of thinking, when you wake up, you get this kind of reboot period that lasts like a minute or two before the cycle kicks in and you get a brief taste of what life was like before. There was a line from Exposure that I cut early on in the process, but it was something along the lines where of like, you get 2 minutes before you remember that you're worried that X is going to happen, you know? It was in response to like, how often do you experience these obsessions? And then they say 2 minutes in the morning is when I don't. 3 minutes in, I had a weird question. Are therapists allowed to share the content of their obsessions with a client if it involves the client? She's in this therapy session and the therapist goes, yeah, I'm worried I'm going to stab you with a pen. Our thoughts are weird, you know? Like, is that allowed?
I loved that. I loved that so much. I've never said that to a client, but I think what they were trying to depict, what I imagine, is they were showing the therapist truly so unfazed by the things that the client was saying that she was able to kind of respond with an even, like at the similar level of absurdity with her response. I think probably there could have been ways she did that didn't involve her saying that to the client directly. But it was well done because you would think if we are putting ourselves in Marnie's shoes or someone else's shoes, someone who's just learning they have OCD, doesn't really understand why they're having these thoughts. Like you imagine telling a mental health provider or a doctor about your thoughts and you're just ready for them to like scream or call 911 or do something to try and keep you from hurting someone. And the way that the therapist reacts, it's like, oh, I didn't expect that. I thought you were going to be really terrified. In my notes, I said LOL.
I wrote down the 3 letters L, O, and L in my notes. I can't lie, I do that too. But there's a thing you say, actually, or someone says, something along the lines of, I have yet to hear something I haven't heard before.
Oh, yeah, I say that.
Yeah, I like that. I like that quite a bit.
Aw, yeah.
I know we don't do reassurance here, but it's very soothing to hear.
Yeah, there's a difference between reassuring someone and also laying down the context for what they might be experiencing and kind of putting it out there, giving them information in the beginning of the process.
A lot of the quotes around this show, I've just been writing them down. I like her roommate quite a bit because she's kind of on the receiving end of all the ways that OCD kind of turns you into kind of like a self-centered person sometimes. She learns to kind of handle herself, handle her romantic life, but also handle just the average person that she interacts with, because that's kind of it's what is asked of you as being a human being in the real world. And, you know, disorders like OCD, you can kind of feel the pressure to only focus on yourself and your own needs and your own thought processes, but that's not the world. The world is you have to interact with other people and not be a dick. And that's hard without a mental illness, you know?
I want to share a quote that I wrote down from the first episode that I loved it. And so as someone I had a lot of sexual intrusive thoughts. And as I was watching this, I was like, I still have a lot of these. But there was this quote she said. So we see her in a hostel. She like moves to London. She like spends the night in a hostel. And when she walks in, there's like this person with their shirt off and she sees someone's nipple. And the quote that we hear her saying to herself is, "That's not just a random nipple. That's 781 minutes of me thinking about what I could do to it. Bite it, suck it, lick it, milk it."
Is it worth it? Let me work it. Put my thing down, flip it, and reverse it. I don't know. Should I leave that in? That was really stupid.
This is the musical episode.
No, yes, that was a very relatable thing for someone that does go through sexual intrusive thoughts. Yeah, there were a lot of just really relatable little quotes throughout the whole thing. I wonder if this show is more helpful for people that do have OCD or don't have OCD, because a lot of it was kind of chronicling the experience of someone that does, like navigating relationships with other people, navigating going throughout life, you know, and that's helpful for people with the disorder. What do you think? Who gets more out of watching this, you think?
Well, I know for me, I felt like it was a hug the whole time. I was like, oh, yeah, I feel you, girl. I also think it could be a good, you know, if someone has never experienced OCD and someone that they know has OCD and has disclosed to them, like, yeah, I have really like distressing thoughts about things that I wouldn't want to do that are sexual related. It could be helpful to watch that, just to, who knows what your person is thinking about, and her experiences are just one person's experience with sexual intrusive thoughts. However, just seeing how like distressing and how like all consuming it can be. What do you think?
I think that this was definitely tailored initially in the first episode or so to people that didn't know much about it, maybe. But then as it went on, the problems become social. The problems become, how do I figure out dating? How do I figure out regular sexual experiences? I wasn't as into the last 3 episodes, but there was one plot with her friend that
I think we should talk about that.
We should talk about that too, because there's a lot to talk about there. Because first, when you realize you have OCD, you kind of bake that into how you live your life. And then when you realize you're being the bad friend or the bad partner or whatever, that takes another level of thought. With this friend plotline, she figures out in a healthy way that this other person is being the problem. That is hard to do when burdened with your own chaotic stuff, your own mental illness. Having the wherewithal to go, oh, okay, it's this person that I need some space from right now. It's not anything I need to change. That is difficult. And that's something that I thought episode 5, I believe, did really, really well. Because that dinner party scene was so aggressive. Like, wow.
For those of you who haven't seen this episode, Marnie shares with her best friend Helen a little bit about her intrusive thoughts. She tells her she has OCD. And initially we see Helen being like, okay, like you're not clean, but okay, if you say so. And we see her respond neutral to positive. But then this information that Marnie shares with Helen is essentially used against her and her friend just like tells all of Marnie's other friends that Marnie's a freak and that Marnie's obsessed with sex. And basically Helen responds with Marnie's worst fear because that's what Marnie worries.
Yeah.
And then Helen says all this, uses it against her, completely takes everything out of context and is so shitty.
Yeah. And she's hurt that she felt abandoned by her friend by moving away. And one thing I'll say is avoiding large parts of your life to appease OCD can be depressingly real, but also dealing with someone you thought you could trust with this very fragile information and having it thrown in your face like a grenade. That was so hard to watch. And oh my goodness.
Especially because we're still seeing Marnie. She's still doubting that she even has OCD, which for most people with OCD, I will say that's kind of a lifelong thing. I don't know about you. I'll have days when I'll wake up and be like, what if I don't even have OCD? I've made a career off of this.
Right.
I've given talks about this and it's all fake.
Sometimes I'll go up to my wife and be like, oh, so by the way, I think I raised money and made a movie based off of a lie. And now I'm just actively lying to people on this podcast. I'm lying to my therapist friend. I'm lying to,
I'm lying to everyone. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so we see Marnie, she's been diagnosed for like a month and she's still like, oh, I don't know if this is real. And her friend, the person who knows her very well, is basically saying, yeah, this is a lie. You're just a freak. Oh, because if someone said that to me now, I'd be like, damn, like that's hurtful. But I'd be able to be like, wait a minute.
Well, Marnie learns that like, oh, you know what? Like this person in my life is out of line and I need to not be friends with you right now. It's again, part of your 20s. A lot of this show is about living in your 20s, just with the added burden of this mental illness. Cause like moving to the city and figuring out a job by the seat of your pants and working an unpaid internship where everyone hates you for no reason. Like all of these things, well, not for no reason, but like all of these things are very emblematic of this sort of chaotic decade of your life. Obviously, I do like how, like, it makes a point to say that your behavior is not excused by OCD, and that's, I forget what her roommate's name is, but her roommate does... Shireen, yeah. That plot kind of unfolds, because Shireen was nothing but nice, despite all the well-meaning, like, oh, it's probably because we're creative, that's why we have this. Like, apart from dumb things like that, she was nothing but nice. But yeah, I think this show really hits on a lot of really relatable things for people with and without OCD, but also this weird intersection of having OCD and interacting with regular daily life. Pure O did this too, and there's actually an interesting parallel being like, oh, in Pure O, we've got, I'm figuring out OCD, but I'm also taking care of other people in this drug rehab center. In this show, she's like, oh, I'm figuring out my OCD stuff, but there's also like, she has this plot line with this friend that is dealing with sex addiction and then like managing that in a workplace. And it does kind of split off and we kind of depart from the OCD stuff a little bit, even though it does serve to differentiate itself from the OCD. But yeah, there are some interesting parallels of how you take care of other people in both of those pieces of work. So I'm sorry that we put two things with basically the same name in front of each other for this podcast, but I do like the parallels that we're finding.
I agree. There was also with all of the characters in Pure, we see them all going through their own development and struggles as young 20, early 30 somethings navigating relationships, work. Like each of the people she meets, we see them having misadventures and having these really awkward interactions. And I like that too, because they're showing like, yeah, Marnie's going through it. And also, even if she didn't have OCD, there would still be these things that would be hard just because that's how life works, especially when you're trying to find yourself as a young adult.
Nobody gets to go through OCD and then like not have to go through life, you know? And like this is chronic illness, addiction, any ongoing problem where you really care, other people around you might not care as much. Nothing exists in a vacuum. You exist as the product of whatever, Kamala, you know?
We're giving her a lot of shout outs.
I think she needs it.
What a month.
Anything else you got on this?
Let me think for a sec. I guess the last takeaway I would say is if you haven't watched Pure, I really recommend it. It's only 6 episodes. They're like 25 minutes each. It was really well done. They did a great job depicting OCD in a way that's not depicted very often. And it's also funny.
So we didn't do the rating with Pure O since we had Dylan as a guest. Do you want to give the out of 10 on here and see if it gets the Juliet stamp of approval?
It does get the Juliet stamp of approval.
Love that. We knew that, but yeah.
Yeah, in case you were wondering. In case you were biting your nails this whole time.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's an appropriate thing to say with body-focused repetitive behaviors. If anyone out there is biting their nails and they're struggling with that, I'm sorry I said that.
How offensive of you.
You can cancel me. I would say I'd give it like a 9 out of 10.
All right.
I think the only thing that would have given it 10 out of 10 is if they incorporated a little bit more of ERP into it somehow.
Isn't that interesting? They didn't focus on that so much.
Because like when she was in the therapy session and she was like, help me get rid of this. And the therapist is like, you'll never get rid of the thoughts. I'm like, okay, yeah. And the therapist could have been like, however, when you're ready, there's a therapy that might help you. Even just like name dropping ERP or something, that would have been 10 out of 10.
Yeah.
But for what it was good.
I noticed that too.
How about for you? Director, lived experience.
I don't give ratings.
Movie, TV commentator.
It's not my genre, the romantic dramedy, but I still really enjoyed it. It was still really funny. It was incredibly relatable. I think I enjoyed the first 3 episodes a bit more than the next 3 episodes, even though there was some stuff in 5 and 6 that I did really connect with. I do kind of see why it didn't get a second season. Because I feel like you explain the problem and then you kind of show how you adjust to the problem and keep living your life. I struggle to see where you could go without it just turning into a straight, like, let's follow these characters as they fall in and out of love with each other, you know?
I totally agree. Especially, too, because it was based on a memoir. And I'm imagining that, I mean, I haven't read the memoir.
Maybe there's like a second half of the book that could have been a season 2.
Maybe her treatment or something.
Maybe all the psychedelics she takes and the Guardian article, maybe that could have been season 3. Who knows?
Maybe it'll come out now.
Yeah, right?
We'll review it next.
Yeah, we'll review it next. All right, Juliet, would you like to take us out?
Yes. Thank you again for joining us on this episode of Intrusive Plots. Once again, I'm Juliet. I'm an OCD therapist and educator. You can find me on Patreon and Instagram under my name, Juliet Gustafson.
I'm Peter. I wrote and directed a thriller about OCD called Exposure. You can find it on demand. You can find it on physical media. I also have a side project called Debut Film Mistakes, where I talk about all the silly filmmaking mistakes that I made on that. You can find that on Instagram and Blue Sky, which I'm doing now. Follow us on Instagram at intrusive_plots and let us know what films you'd like us to do next. We kind of want to do a dumb one pretty soon. We've seen a lot of really good ones, so let's get a good dumb one in there.
That's right. That will be the quote for the next one. A good dumb one.
Let's get a good dumb one in there. Okay, goodbye.
Bye.